Okay, so I don't need an introduction. We're going to do the panel talk now, and I just wanted to tell you about how that's going to go, and then get the panel to introduce themselves. We will do an introduction from them in a minute, and kind of just ask them, why are you on this panel talking to us about Python 3? So we can think about that. I have some questions for them, so we're going to do Q&A and kind of let them have a discussion among themselves for our benefit. We will try and leave time at the end for questions from you. If you check the comments of the Meetup page, there is a Google moderator account, so you can put your question there. If people want to ask questions there, I will just ask you to stand up and raise your hand at the end, and we'll try and make sure we have 10 or 15 minutes for questions from the audience. So we've got time for that. Kenneth kind of already polled people, and I was planning on doing that. But again, just like really quickly, if you've written any Python 3 code at all, you know, can I see a hand? Okay, so there's the hello world in Python 3 audience. Welcome, guys. People, ladies, gentlemen, PSF members, developers. Would you mind, I'm not going to ask you questions and go down the line and make each person answer them in general. I'd kind of encourage you to have a conversation among yourselves. But for this first little bit, would you mind just going down the line, introduce yourself, talk about why it is that you're here. We hopefully have a variety of viewpoints and backgrounds, and let's just share that with the panel, and we'll go through that just quickly. Wesley.
All right, great. Thanks again, Simeon. So, as a teacher, you know what one of the FAQs is, right? Do you teach Python 2 or Python 3? Which one should I install? All right. Of course, as a teacher, I'm all about teaching the language, not about minor differences between versions, you know? So I actually do teach Python 2 and 3 in my books and in the classes, just so that people know, and whatever project you get on, whether it's a startup starting completely from scratch in 3, or working in a large company that that's entrenched in 2.4 still. All right. So I'm on the fence, which is an easy escape for me.
Hi, I'm Benjamin Peterson. I'm a core developer of CPython, and I have burned a lot of time on PyPy, but it was worth it. I also wrote the 6 library, which provides some Python 2 and Python 3 compatibility. And yes, so here I am on this panel.
So my name is Glpyh, or actually it's not, but that's what people call me, so it's as good as a name. I am mostly known, I guess, for having committed the original sin of Twisted, but there are, I've worked on many other projects, many things using Twisted. I've contributed in a variety of capacities to a whole list of Python open source projects that I won't bore you with, but the main reason that I'm on this panel, if that is the slant of the biography that we're offering today, is that I maintain a lot of software in Python. And by Python, I mean Python 2, because that's what people mean when they say Python. However, I am a Python 3 skeptic. I have long been critical of it. I was critical of it from pretty much the first day when Python Core proposed, hey, what if we make this Python 3K joke into a real thing? However, unlike many Python 3 skeptics, I actually believe that the problem is not quite as grave as everyone thinks it is, and I was actually very pleased to see Kenneth's talk, because I really agree with him on a lot of the malaise that is currently, the community is currently experiencing. A lot of it comes from this sense of received wisdom that we have to be using Python 3, and that's the right thing to do, and yet without any specific practical guidance on how to do that. So I actually, my interest in this panel and in other Python 2.3 division things is in trying to get there to be one Python again, and I really don't care which one it is. Like, at such a deep level, I can't express to you how much I don't care if Python 3 succeeds. But I want Python to succeed, and in particular, I want PyPy to succeed. So thanks for that. But yeah, so I'm here to talk about from the perspective of what it's like to maintain large libraries with very small teams and deadlines. I currently work for Rackspace, and Rackspace has tons and tons of open source software that uses Python, as well as many proprietary systems. And OpenStack, for example, is another very, very large Python project, which is firmly stuck, I guess is the word, in Python 2. Yeah, dealing with large realities like that is what I spend a lot of my day doing. And despite being a Python 3 skeptic, like I said, I want there to be one Python, so I tend to write to the Python 2.3 subset with libraries like 6, so that that unification process is easier no matter what happens in the future. I've tried to work with Python core developers as much as I can to provide feedback from the perspective of library authors, so that's why I'm here.
Hi everyone, my name is Aaron Maxwell, and I tend to use the nickname bread symbol online on Hacker News and GitHub and places like that. And I'm on the engineering team at Lyft, where I pretty much count as the resident Pythonista there. And in the past, I've been writing Python code for, I think it's 8 or 9 years now, the majority of the code I've been writing. In the past 3 years, I've actually written more code in Python 3 than in Python 2. And thank you. Yeah. So yeah, and I think I was, unlike a lot of people here, I'm probably the least famous person on this panel today, and that's good in a way because I don't have one way I'm not famous is I haven't created any large, widely used open source libraries. What I've been doing is building applications that basically paying customers are using. So I am pretty much, I'll say I'm pretty much in the gung-ho pro Python 3 camp. And I think that it's going to be a lot of fun being on this panel, and looking forward to it.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Jessica Mckellar. I am a director for the Python Software Foundation. For folks who don't know what that really means, so the PSF is a nonprofit. It's the stewarding organization behind the language in the community. We do things like assume the risk for PyCon. We provide a lot of grants to the community for development, maintain some of the trademarks, things like that. The PSF is almost entirely volunteer driven. I'm a volunteer. I donate my time to the PSF. This mirrors Python's core development ecosystem. Python is almost exclusively developed by volunteers. I am on this panel as someone who's taking the long view on Python, sort of similar to what Glpyh said, although I think our implementation details are very different. What keeps me up at night is the long-term success of the language, and honestly the Python 2 versus 3 discussion doesn't keep me up at all compared to much greater existential problems in the community, and I actually think it's a shame that so many people are still spending time sort of debating what to do and writing blog posts to rally the community. And sort of like the way that I view this is like if everyone in this room were at a sprint working on porting libraries to Python 3 instead of discussing the Python 2 versus 3 debate, that would actually be much more productive. Just for some examples of some of the existential things I think are way more important for Python than the 2 versus 3 discussion. So one example is losing ground in domains where Python has historically had a really strong presence. So for example, some systems programming things are now, Go is becoming a very popular alternative to Python. I work at Dropbox. We write our new systems software in Go and not Python for performance reasons. Or like Node.js for server-y web stuff. Another existential problem that I think we should be focusing on more than questions like this is like the general changing computing landscape. Like we sell, like last year more mobile phones were sold than laptops or desktops. Guess what you don't program mobile phones in? Python. Does this matter to us? It may or may not, but we're definitely not thinking about it critically enough. And then another example is internationally, Python is not considered a real language to develop in a lot of places in the world. This is not so true in the United States, but I travel around the world speaking at conferences and listening to people about Python in my capacity as a director for the PSF, and you can't get a job in Python in many places in the world. And that seems like a much bigger problem to me than this discussion. So I'm here to, as actually a real optimist, to disagree with much of Kenneth's thesis, and to try to encourage us to take a broader perspective than the Python 2 versus 3 discussion about what matters for the long-term success of the language. And I'm happy to expound upon this at length with actual questions.
So do you feel then that if we were to solve some of those problems, like making it much more attractive for systems programmers, that maybe this would help us not be so distracted at the moment?
I don't know that I understand the question. I think that if
like
rallying around some of these more existential problems would be more exciting.
like that would just kind of like correct the current issue that I'm having.
What is the exact issue that you're currently having?
Well,
I sort of don't buy this idea that that the 2 versus 3 problem is terrifying. I don't know that I buy that the Python 2 community and the Python 3 community are totally separate entities that don't communicate.
Yeah.
Maybe we should launch into questions and get into this a little bit. Maybe I don't know if you want to introduce yourself again.
No.
So you totally are launching into the questions already. So I mean that's really my first question. And Kenneth, maybe you don't need the bio since we know who you are and you presented at length. But I guess my first question is so my Twitter feed blew up for the last 6 months with people saying oh no, Python 3 is a disaster, no one's using it, or hey, Python 3 is great, or it's fundamentally broke, and you kind of said you put yourselves in camps, I'm a skeptic or I'm a Python 3 optimist, and only one person says this is not the problem. Where are we as a language?
So actually, if I could echo some of Jessica's concerns, basically the thing that bothers me about the Python 2 versus Python 3 issue is that it is a tremendous distraction. I think actually Python 3 is a fine language. The reason that I characterize myself as a Python 3 skeptic is not that I think Python 3 is bad or that it shouldn't succeed, so much as that the difficulty in migrating to it has not been worth the benefits that it provides. And for example, Jessica has an amazing talk. I'm not sure if you've given this more than once, but a talk about build infrastructure in Python is the way that I think about it. I don't know if you characterize it that way, but about how it's hard to sit down at a computer and make a program in Python that you can share with your friends. It's hard to make a mobile application in Python. It's possible. You can write one with Glpyh. It's possible to make an executable that you can run on Windows. It's possible to write stuff in a browser. You can run it with PyJS. But these are all half-broken, unmaintained ecosystems that nobody is really focusing on because we're having this lengthy debate about Python 3, and there's discussions about having a matrix infix multiplication operator, and I really don't care, and I want those discussions. I feel like if there's one thing that I could change, it would be to stop all of that work and refocus the core developers on hey, did you know that building state extensions doesn't work on Windows? That's a real problem that people, it's not that people face it in the Python community every day. We all sort of know how to install exactly the right minor release patch level of Visual Studio 2008 for Python, or for Windows and your Windows XP VM or whatever you have to do to build Python extensions. Maybe you don't all know how to do that, but if you need to do it on Windows, you figure it out. The problem is if you're a new user to Python, first you bounce off the 2 versus 3 question. Then you bounce off the how do I build C extensions for Python question. Then you bounce off of the, well, where's the text editor that I actually make my Python programs with question. And these things are what are keeping people out of the community and preventing us from growing and promoting Python. And the 2 versus 3 dichotomy, if there's a problem with it, the problem is the Python.org front page. It's that it sort of prompts you to download Python 3, and it doesn't acknowledge that you might then not be able to do the thing that you wanted to do with it. And the emphasis on promoting Python 3 and getting to the future of the language means that we are telling people that the Space Invaders game that they want to build for Mr. Brewer's third period computer science class is less important than the architectural evolution of language constructs, because you should really, the Pygame developers should have ported, and I think that Space Invaders clone is more important than any of that stuff. I think that the most important thing is getting new people who are trying to learn Python to have a flawless experience as they enter the community. And maybe Python 3 can help with that, but the way it's being presented right now does not. Would anyone else like to respond?
I completely agree.
I feel like this
I don't think we disagree at all.
Actually, I can have a question for that. Like, do you think that one response to that for the community or for the core developers or both would be to focus on what the limit? Because actually, I love that analogy you made. You know, the third grade computer science project. That's so important. I totally agree. And so the question is, what can we do where we are right now? Because another thing I agree with that you said is that, you know, it's been a lot of effort and maybe, you know, was it worth it? But the reality is we are where we are right now, and how do we move forward? So do you think maybe, my first thought when you said all this is that, well, that's great, we can identify these problems and then focus on fixing them for 3 versus what would the alternative be? What do you think about that?
Well, at this point, I think we should take a break, and Jessica should just deliver the entirety of her talk. But no, so I mean, I feel like the thing to do is to, in terms of where we are right now and how to move forward, is to everyone in this room, and I mean this not as a hypothetical thing, but actually do this, like tonight or tomorrow if you have some time. Spin up a new VM or get an old computer you've got lying around, and go to python.org, pretend you don't know that OS 10 already has Python installed, pretend you don't have any expertise with this, try to just make a little game that like draws a little picture on your screen with Python, and make a note of all of the places where you had to use your special Python developer knowledge, and what you needed to see was not there in front of you from searching on Google for Python video game, whatever the task you were setting before yourself to do. And part of the problem is that and in a way, the core developers, it's not really their fault. The core developers are making a language interpreter, and the language interpreter they make works fine. There's no team that's clearly responsible or has taken responsibility for making the whole ecosystem kind of work from the front page. And the website team has done a reasonably good job. I mean, like, the recent redesign is great, but like, we should all give that a try and see if it's interesting to you. And enumerate the problems that you're seeing, blog about those problems. And if the Python 2 versus 3 thing that Kenneth brought up in terms of like confusing the users is one of the problems, then definitely make a note of it. As far as what we can do with the interpreter, like, I think that we have to make the process of porting easier. I think that to get, because there's a broad ecosystem.
Porting what exactly?
Yes. Porting everything. There are various metrics that Python core devs especially like to cite to say that Python 3 is being successful, that we have so many percentage of the top projects that are ported. There's a very big long tail of Python projects that get very little maintenance, and the process of porting those is really rocky right now. Particularly, it's very hard to partially port something. And I know this because Twisted has a very big project. We're trying to port a little bit at a time so we can see a little success, get a little bit more into that pip3 install Twisted package. And the support of distutils and setup tools and pip and the Python 3 interpreter itself and the Python 2 interpreter and the standard library is really not there in terms of getting, being able to have a little success, port one of your modules in your big package that has 30 modules and be done, and then move on to the next one. And that's what I think has kept so much software stuck in, if we're going to use terms like stuck and backwards and whatever, stuck in the Python 2 ecosystem, is that it can't move forward because it's a moonshot. It's all or nothing. You either actually port everything to Python 3 in one crazy hackathon where all 900 Django developers show up, or, which is kind of how they did it, but or you just kind of wait until somebody has that time, as opposed to just doing the way that we fix normal bugs in every other aspect of software development, which is just like, you port the one thing, and you fix the next thing, you fix the next thing. So yeah, in terms of the interpreter itself changing, or the language changing, or the core devs doing something, it's really that area that we need to focus on to make sure that long tail of packages eventually get ported.
So somebody else, I mean, we're kind of, where are we? But also it sounds like we're hitting what's really the question on everybody's mind. How do we go forward from where we are currently? What does the future hold for Python? What should the future hold for Python?
Benjamin, do you want to, as a core developer, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, okay. What does the future hold for Python? I'm probably the most dismal person on this panel. You know, I mean, maybe in 5 years we'll be writing everything in Go, and it'll live in fun. I mean, I'm having a good time now. I don't know. I mean, maybe Python is like irreparably broken on everything we need to do in the future.
Or do you want to cut him off right now? I mean, just, okay, maybe to add some texture to that answer, I'm personally not that worried by the slow adoption. Look, project planning is really hard. Maybe we goofed by 5 to 10 years on the transition. Software planning is very tough. The distros switching to Python 3 being a default is going to be a big driver for random new users switching over, and for like random companies who don't have a lot of context here switching over. It's a long game. I think that we're doing a lot of good things in this space. We have a lot of good relationships with various distributions. People from Red Hat, from Debian, from Ubuntu are very involved in the community. Arch Linux happens to have Python 3 as the default already, as being the real vanguard there. And there are plans for more popular distros like Ubuntu and Debian to move towards that over time. Is it a long game? Yeah. The people who are on Rel 6 right now are going to be stuck with whatever 2.6 for the rest of my natural life. But that's okay. I think playing a long game here is totally a reasonable thing to do, and if what we need is to port that long tail, I don't know how long that long tail is, maybe it's 500 packages, maybe it's 1,000. If each of you in this room would like to apply for a grant from the Python Software Foundation to port your favorite package from that long tail, let's all do one of those over the next 2 months, and then the long tail problem is done. Awesome.
I have a positive thing to say. Okay, so as Glpyh was saying, one thing us core developers like to stuff in people's faces is if you look at like the top PyPy package downloads, like at least 90% of those have been ported and are compatible with Python 3. So I feel like that if I want to start writing a really awesome Python application, then all the libraries and a lot of the infrastructure is there for me to do that. And so even if I can't use OpenStack with Python 3, I can still write my new startup website in Python 3, or I can start writing my new matrix library with the matrix multiplication operator. In fact, I can only do that in Python
3. I just really want to second that, because it's really useful to make a distinction between different kinds of code bases. So there's a difference between having a very widely used Python 2 library, this is exactly the problem you're facing, right? And making that something that's very popular and very substantial, making it support both Python 2 and 3, that's a tremendous amount of work. If you have a library that for whatever reason, perhaps it's only used internally, or for whatever other reason you decide it's not important to maintain that backward 2.x compatibility, you can just say, okay, you can do this, take this don't look back approach, port it to 3, and that's a lot easier to pull off. And then the third situation then is really what you're talking about what greenfield development. If you, in 2014, if you start a new project based on Python 3.4, the library support, third-party library support is almost entirely there. The language itself in the standard library is pretty bug-free, certainly much better than the 3.0, 3.1, 3.2. It's performant, it's robust. Really, for 99% of new projects you'll start right now, you will have essentially zero problems that could have been avoided by using 2.7 instead.
So just wanted to add about that long tail thing. I completely agree with it. Actually, in 2008, unfortunately, I don't have documented proof But in 2008, in December, October was when 2.6 came out, and then December was when 3.0 came out. I actually said, publicly, I think I said publicly that, due to the backwards incompatibility stuff, it's really going to honestly take a decade, right? I'm not going to I haven't been stressing over the adoption rate of Python 3, at least not until 2018. So, software migration will move at the speed that it moves at. It is what it is, right? And when you have something that's backwards incompatible, it's going to take a little bit longer, even if those changes are not that major. I was at a startup in 2008. We were on Python 2.6, and then I went to work at Google in 2009, and I was shocked to find out that I had to go backwards to 2.4. All right, large companies, the larger you are, the longer it's going to take to move. So, of course, if you're starting a new project, yes, you can do it in 3. But as you get to a larger and larger organization, you're going to find yourself going backwards in time, because that's just how things work. And so, whatever amount of time it'll take that amount of time. The number of packages that are available in Python 3 now, I think you already mentioned that 90% of all the packages have been ported, and if you look at the graph, there is a graph. York actually has a graph that shows the number of packages that are available in Python 3. That number looks like a log chart. It's a hockey stick going up. So the stuff is there. The problem is all of us are probably working for pseudo larger companies, or we're working for a startup that has dependencies on 2, which makes it harder to move off. So you've either got to right now go cold turkey, or you're really, really lucky and every single dependency you have is already on 3, in which case, you're already good to go. But truth be told, that easy stuff to port is easy. Hard stuff to port is really hard. So it's just one of those things that I think we have to sort of endure, and hopefully during that time we don't lose audience. So I think that's the thing that some of the folks on the panel are afraid of as well. But that's just my take on it, is that it takes time, and and hopefully we all play our parts. We start moving our stuff, start experimenting if you haven't already. I've had to port every single code sample in my books to 3. That's been an interesting exercise. Even tricky ones. In fact, I'm just throwing in best practices, and I don't want to even lose some of that important stuff, like how do you port something. So actually, when I did port some of the stuff over, I just put that stuff straight in the book. Here's how you would do it step by step, because I did it this way. So I think the more instruction, the more porting tools there are, like 6 and Future, and all those. Modernize, I guess, is another one. I think those things are all really helpful, but we do need some concerted effort to get people to port, to help people to port, and to kind of somebody needs to write a porting best practices book or something like that. I know there's already one out there. I can't remember who did it, but porting to Python 3.
Leonard?
Yeah, Leonard did it. That's right. So we just need more of these things, right?
So I think the fact of the matter is that I agree with everything all of you were saying. That but I think the reason I'm giving this talk that I gave today is because I see this greater separation happening, and that I think Python 3.4 is ready for us to use, and the fact is that people aren't using it, and I think that is the problem. Is that it is ready for everyone to use today, and that there is it's like a product made without an audience. There is no market for this product, and the seed developers or the people that are actually building it have shown that they are more than willing to work with the community to make some changes to make it more approachable, to make it easier to port, to help unify the community, which is really great. Because we need to unify, because we are splitting in half right now. Because we're not. Well, you saw the talk.
So I would actually like to. Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'd like to challenge one of the assumptions that is sort of pervading this discussion so far, which is that Python 3 is the future. We need to make progress. We should all be moving towards Python 3, and I'm going to have a qualified disagreement with that. And the qualification is that. Long term, that is probably true, because that is the maintained version, and that is what we're.
The community doesn't know what it wants, and that's what I'm trying to assert, is that is the problem.
So, but one of the things I should say that the community should want is, if you're writing server-side software in Python today, you are at risk of losing ground to Go and to Node, because they have really fantastic performance, as Jessica mentioned. One thing you can do, and there's this impression, so you do it in Python 2.7, and it's slow. You do it in Python 3.4, and it's probably a little bit slower, because actually Python 3.4 is not quite up to where 2.7 was in terms of micro-optimizations. And I still have to fight this battle where I talk to people about how Python is slow. If you use PyPy, which is better supported on Python 2, they just shipped their first Python 3.2 compatible version, so this is starting to become a little less true. But if you use PyPy as your production runtime, just assume that everything should be PyPy by default all the time, you will get performance that is in the range of Haskell or C or C++. And just to throw out a couple of examples, I have a couple of colleagues that wrote a memcache key replacement. So memcache, as you know, has a special hand-tuned custom custom allocator, custom dictionary implementation written in C for speed. It's like the fastest dictionary implementation on the planet. It's optimized for server workloads, et cetera, et cetera. The entire daemon is written in C all the way down for maximum performance. They wrote a clone of this using a Python dict in PyPy, using Twisted, without any particular optimizations, and got within 10% of memcache's performance. So, just a hand for the PyPy. They didn't do anything special. But the important thing about that is that is not the impression that Python creates. And one of the reasons it doesn't create that impression is because everyone's very concerned about, if they're concerned about Python versions at all, which many of us are not, the concern is, let's move to CPython 3.4. And I would say, if you want to compete with Node, you want to compete with Go, you want to convince people that Python is a viable, performant language for server-side applications, just use PyPy. And that impression will start to disappear. So for today, that probably means writing your code in a Python 2.7 compatible way. They are working on Python 3, and they will migrate to it, so that's not a long-term thing. And if you want to stick to Python 3.2, it'll be fine. But that's just something I want to keep in people's heads.
Yeah. So that's a really good point, actually. And I think one of the big challenges that's been kind of facing Python is performance in the ways you mentioned, with the competition from some of these other languages. And that's actually one reason I'm really excited about PyPy. It's just so amazing and awesome, and just a gift. But that said, while PyPy is improving its incrementing the X and 3.x support, it's not like we have to wait, because I think Python 3 has a tremendous amount to offer. I saw a blog post, I don't unfortunately remember the author, but it was noting that the cumulative release notes for all 3.x series was something like 192 pages. So there's a lot there that Python 3 brings, and it's going to take some time to master it. It's going to take some time to learn it. And for those engineering domains where performance is not the limiting factor at this time, that makes it a little easier to start using these, I think.
Just the one other thing I'll say about PyPy is that first it's been many years in the making. PyPy's performance was way worse than CPython's for the vast majority of its existence, and it started as an experiment in the community. And again, sort of with framing this discussion as thinking about the broader picture for Python, like what we really need is more experiments to tackle these big questions, like keeping Python relevant for the next 10 years, as opposed to some of these more specific discussions around porting large code bases. Like, it would be great if we had way more people thinking about experiments in this space than maybe arguing on Hacker News about Python versus C. But just again, like PyPy was, like they had a seed funding from the PSF, like we gave them a $10,000 grant to explore some of this stuff. PyPy 3 development is basically totally crowdsourced. So this is a totally community-driven endeavor, and it's interesting that like the future of Python could be PyPy, which started as this really crazy experiment in the community. Like lots of things are possible if people are willing to take the chance on them and put in the work.
So can we shift ground just a little bit in terms of the discussion? It's interesting to me that I haven't heard a single person say like Python 3.4 as a language sucks, or here's the things that I hate about it. If Python 3.4 especially is great, and I kind of feel like everybody experiential oddities aside, could like Python 3.4, could even love 3.4, why aren't people using it, in your estimation? And maybe specifically, what's been your approach for moving to Python 3? How do you port software? How do you move your practical everyday development experience to Python 3 from 2?
As mentioned recently, I think that one problem is that the vast majority of us are work at large companies, or like most people in this room probably work at companies with large code bases, that it probably doesn't make sense to port. But if I were starting another startup, I would totally use Python. And if there weren't library concerns, I would totally use Python 3.
Actually, I think to speak to your first question, why aren't people using it more? I think there may be an awareness issue, because some people would ask, why would I use Python 3? Why would I not use, stick with 2? And my initial reaction to that is really, well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you migrate to the advanced language? Because, I think sorry, did you?
No, keep going.
Oh, I think that we've all, see, there's kind of a bigger concern here too, I think, which is that we've all heard of stories about older engineers who get to a point in their careers where suddenly their skills are outdated because they didn't take the time to invest in upgrading those skills over time. Just as they went along, they kept doing the things that worked for them yesterday or the year before, and suddenly the world had moved on. So I think if you want to excel in this profession and you really want to do well in your craft and do that over the long term, that's certainly my intention. I love doing this. I can't believe the universe pays me for this. Then I think you really have to get in the habit of trying new things and learning new things. And this, to me, Python 3 is very motivating personally just because it has some new things. It expands the language.
I think the fact of the matter is most people feel like it's way too expensive to go import everything, and there's almost no benefit to it for them. There's a lot of really great improvements to the language, but none of those things are nearly attractive enough to go and actually go switch for them. And because for me, 277 is the perfect programming language for me. I can do everything I could ever possibly want to build with Python with 277, and I don't need to go relearn the whole entire way Unicode and bytes work and change the way all of my software works, because I work on the wire. So all of my code is literally, I have to rewrite all my code twice now, everywhere, for all the code I write. I hate working with 3 in that regard. But once you abstract it all, it's fine. So but I hate working with it when I have to work with writing requests. Importing it to 3 was the worst experience of my entire life. But so it's not just but I'd rather see us be a community, because that's more important to me. Yeah, but that's why it's not just about being latest. It's this is a product that a group of people have made, and it feels like an outside force. I'm saying you need this. I'm no, I don't. I feel that's why most people aren't using it, because they aren't using it, and it's because no, I don't. And that's the problem. So if they share that no, I don't, they can be oh, well, let's kind of come together in the middle. Because the C Python team, I think, has been very clear that they're willing to be oh, well, let's make it easier to have the code run both ways. Both ends are very flexible, I think.
Actually, I want to go run a survey on this now, actually, because I'd be really curious in the data. Maybe I have those superpowers. Maybe we'll write a blog post about it. Because I believe that the problem is that most people just work with legacy code bases, and not that it's not wanting to learn new things. But I don't think there's data on this, so maybe I'll get that data for us.
Be very interested to find out.
There's an audience to poll.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's ask.
Hello. Yeah, so my feeling is that I don't really like to have to learn new things, and what would make me learn new thing is if there was a really cool library that was only written in Python 3, I would probably think, yeah, it's time for me to switch. But what I wanted to ask was, do you think there's any danger that we might set up a culture where coding in Python 2 is cooler than coding in Python 3? Where it makes us more hardcore, more old school?
I think that Python 2.7 right now is technically the most modern, stable programming language ever made. So if you if you like wanted to build like really robust software, 2.7's not ever going to change. So it's a good target.
So that's a yes then.
I mean, if you want to build like enterprise software that is like written in Python, then 2.7 would be a great choice in my opinion, personally.
So I think that actually it is cooler. So
Yeah.
we already have a problem. I did want to take the discussion back just a little bit, specifically to the issue of you wanted somebody to rain on the Python 3 parade. I don't know if it's Simeon. So let me just say why I hate Python 3. Because first of all, my experience with Python 3, and I do think that there is I'm really glad to have the Python 3 application developer perspective reflected here, because I feel like we don't get that sometimes. Just core devs versus infrastructure devs, and just slightly acrimonious back and forth. So it makes me happy to hear that enthusiasm. But the problem with 3 for me is that the experience of using it has entirely been all of the low-level details that changed, many of which were not improvements. Like, for example, the fact that indexing bytes out of an array, like that seems like a minor detail, the fact that that gives you an integer now, but when you're doing byte-at-a-time processing in Python, which now PyPy makes possible, and you can do radically fast, like byte-at-a-time processing on byte arrays, or strings. And now that semantic is totally different, and you need to stick an is instance in the middle of that loop and totally break the JIT viewers like analysis of the types through that thing. That starts to weigh on the experience of writing Python, and I've written a lot of code and twisted that just needed to be fiddled around for no particular benefit. So that's a lot of my experience is just changing that stuff, and also dealing with standard library modules which were not ported correctly. Large portions of you want to jump in there, Kenneth?
No, I'm agreeing. It's ridiculous how poorly a lot of them were ported, but it's improved a lot.
Yeah, so 3.4 is definitely a huge step forward in that. But 3.4 took a long time to come.
If you look at the code, like it's obvious that like the problems that exist in 3 just because of the way like Unicode works, like a lot of the code is like replicated because you have to do it once for bytes and once for strings if you're going to accept either or, and like it's existent in the standard library everywhere. And it's it's just the way things are in 3. It's not like before I just wrote code once and it just worked for both and it was beautiful because I knew how it worked, and now I can't do that because you just can't. It's impossible.
Yeah. So I've faced that in a bunch of places, but to move on to kind of like why I'm not super excited about a lot of these features, it's because Python 3, in addition to causing all of these low-level fiddly detail problems that I had to deal with, did not fix any of the issues that I had with Python 2. And I still have lots. I don't think Python 2 is necessarily the best language. Yeah. We're talking about moving, like, if we're talking about advanced programming languages features, not that they're better languages, but Haskell and Clojure are presenting radically new ideas. And they're allowing for things like for example, Python punishes you when you try to declare a simple object with a couple of attributes. You have to type all the attribute names 3 times. That happens to me every single day, right? Def under init, self, comma, foo, comma, bar, comma, baz. Self dot foo equal foo, self dot bar. You're all bored already, and I'm just saying like one constructor. Imagine a code base with thousands and thousands of these. That's a problem that Python 3 could have solved, but didn't really. And there are also problems with writing libraries, right? We talk about how Python's a language for consenting adults. The problem is it's not always informed consent, because you accidentally import a private implementation detail of a library, accidentally make use of something outside of its contract. It breaks, and the developer tells you, well, I didn't mean for you to use it that way. It wasn't documented, so tough. And if we had nice abstraction boundaries, so yes, having the ability to break that seal and kind of reach into the guts of the library and do whatever you need to do to get work done today is fantastic. But it's nice to know that you're doing that, and Python 3 didn't facilitate that at all.
The things for me have been like, those are all like really objective things. For me, it's all very subjective things. So like, I don't like the fact that all the dictionary changes are all like, it's like objectively really superior. Like you have like everything's a set, and you have all these like array views and stuff like that they've built in. So if you do like keys, it's just an iterator that's presented, which is really nice and obviously the way things should be. But as a user, like remember the first time I like dug into like an object and like thunderdict and like saw all this beautiful stuff that like opened this whole world to me. And I guess this isn't something that's affecting me directly, but like when I'm poking around in there and feeling it, I'm like always feel like there's this like layer behind, like I'm a layer abstracted away from what I was learning, like Python is now like this kind of clunky machine that's like a little too advanced to understand and fit in your head now. And before it was this super simple, elegant thing.
Like in the 2.x area, or what?
When did that change?
It went in 3, like 3, and from when you went from 2 to 3, basically, it got like, you know, they added so many optimizations in all these different areas, and it made it really, I know it's just added a lot of complexity, in my opinion.
So I have like half a dozen audience questions, so we can just run through those, and if you will kind of decide among yourselves who gets the best answer, and we'll just get 1 or 2 answers to the questions. Some of these are, you know, less philosophical, more straightforward.
Yo, you were talking earlier about kind of back-end server performance, which I care a lot about as a back-end Python engineer. And you were also talking about these other awesome new languages like Go, Node, Haskell, etc. And I think that performance, like how fast is execution, is one thing, but a huge difference is also concurrency model between Python and those languages. More so, like the reason people are choosing Go is concurrency model, not because of performance. Performance is there, that's awesome. But, and then you're also saying all these new features in Python 3. Well, that's the first feature in Python 3.4 that I actually care about in Python 3 is new concurrency model. And so I was wondering thoughts on that whole area. And like my TLDR is I actually don't like the concurrency model we have in Python 3.4. I like Go's a lot more. So I would like to hear thoughts on that and also abstractions on top of it.
So the concurrency model in Python 3.4 has been available in Python for 15 years in a library called Twisted. You can check it out. That's a little bit disingenuous because actually the yield thing has only been in Twisted for 8 years, not 15. But the other concurrency model, like the Go concurrency model, is available in Eventlet. I mean, the channels are available in Python, and it's just a question of connection.
I guess another thing is Go can take up the whole box, right? Python still, you run it, you're still only getting one processor's worth of CPU.
So for those of you in the back who might not have heard, he said that with Python, with Go, you can just consume the whole box, and with Python, you only get one CPU worth of concurrency. This is more of a Twisted question for me personally than a Python question, because this is a problem we're really kind of working on addressing. We have an API called spawn process where you can run multiple isolated processes easily. It's not easy enough, and I acknowledge it's a weakness of Python. We need to be working on it, and I am. So, yeah.
I guess just echoing that, just to re-emphasize that we talk about like the core developers are off doing stuff, and like we're over here judging them. Like this is all volunteers basically, and if what we need is more experimentation in concurrency land in Python, like the people who are going to do it are us.
In this room.
Yeah, so like if you need a $10,000 grant to go experiment with a better API for this, like come hit me up. It's really just, it's all volunteers, so we have to make this happen if we want to stay competitive.
And one quick addendum to what Jessica's saying, I should also say that some of you out here might be more kind of designers or like front-end people than people who are going to work on a new concurrency model or a JIT with software transactional memory. If that's you, like, we need your help too, because as someone who's working on some seriously like hardcore engine technology for Python, we don't have anyone working on the website, and we need people for Python's website, we need people for our project's website, we need people for the new project's website.
100% true, and we do have a messaging problem that the PSF needs to get better at, and that we need your help being better with. Just yes.
So I have an addendum to this this concurrency question. What are some of the best practices for making software that's that exploits multi-core and multi-machine computing? And I want to kind of frame that question with respect to approaching that problem from 2 versus 3.
Okay, I guess that's me again. So the best solution for Python today is to do something that's going to involve running multiple isolated processes, ideally on Unix. Probably don't want to do super concurrency on Windows. So that said, it's kind of tricky. There are a bunch of things like, one thing that you can do is you can make heavy use of message queues, for example, and use a tool like Celery to run your workloads in parallel. That's a little bit clunky. It involves pickling all of your states. You have to really think in a different kind of way. Another thing that you can do, so there are several projects which have used Twisted to good effect. The project I used to work on at my previous job, Calendar and Context Server, uses a model where it uses Twisted, it accepts connections, and it doles them out to sub-processes. You call spawn process, you hand the file descriptor to a sub-process with a different reactor API, which I don't want to get into right now, but those types of models where, and in the standard library there is the sub-process module and the multiprocessing module. So I'm very familiar with the Twisted things. I think that they're like kind of better and super cool and you should use them. But there are various ways to spawn multiple processes in Python and to let them run concurrently and not have them all coordinated through a single controller. And the more you can do that, the better. And actually with like WSGI, if you're writing a WSGI application nowadays, typically if you choose a reasonably good WSGI container, many of them support just multi-process execution modes, and so you can get scalability that way. The trick is when you want to get scalability and also some other interesting features of Python and combine them. And that is a very much per library, per feature kind of discussion.
And 2 versus 3, I think the story is largely unchanged for 2 versus 3. There are some new async primitives, but the multi-process story is largely unchanged.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. It's not. This is actually something I think that bears repeating. The 2 versus 3 chasm is not nearly as bad as you would think in terms of like how you solve problems in Python.
So another user question, would you recommend or would you consider encouraging people to support Python 3 in their libraries and applications and not Python 2, the stick instead of the carrot to drive adoption?
Potentially, if that seems to be what the community wants. That's why we need to get more opinions first.
I'm actually a little more aggressive about that. Because I think that I think it's a good idea, because if you're creating a new library, because very often when we write open source libraries, we're scratching our own itch, aren't we? So in my world, I do write a lot of Python 2 code still, but there are domains in which I just write Python 3, and I don't even have to think about 2 really. In that kind of scenario, I can write a library, I can segment out some of the code into a library, adapt it to 3, and then put it out. I'm not draining my time and attention and energy into supporting 2 for that also. And in this way, I'm also contributing in a small way towards encouraging people to adopt 3. And that way, because I think we all agree that it would be great if as a community we could focus our energy on one or the other and move forward. And I'm kind of hoping that's 3, but I'm okay if it ends up being 2. So I actually am pretty much generally in favor of it.
One more?
No. And just to keep my answer short, I think that doing that is unlikely to encourage people to switch to Python 3 for your library alone, and is very likely to result in duplicated work when people rewrite it because they need it to run on PyPy because they want it to run 50,000 times faster. So I think at some point when it really is about like stragglers like Red Hat, still shipping Python 2.4 in 2068, right? At that point, yes, don't support them. They can commercially support their own customers. It's fine. But for today, I think just writing to the common subset is not that hard, especially if it's a greenfield project. And I think it's worth that little extra pain. I can understand a respectful disagreement on that issue, though. If it is easier for you, though, go ahead and do it. You can always backport later.
So 2 questions combined into one, and maybe, some of the other areas of concern Jessica mentioned. Somebody asked, is there any chance, or what can we do to see writing Android applications in Python be a reality? And someone else says, why doesn't Python run in the browser? What do we have to do to make it happen?
Okay, so I'll answer part of this, maybe people jump in. I have a whole talk related to this that is worth exploring this more. My basic belief on this is like the baby steps. Step number 1 is that we need people at least dabbling with developing mobile apps in Python. If nobody is doing it, we have no hope of developing robust libraries that move into the future. So if I could give you all a call to action, it would be sometime this quarter, just for funsies, write a mobile app in Glpyh just to see what it's like and report some bugs. And the layer beyond that is that you start actually writing applications that you sell in the App Store, and the level beyond that is that it's actually something more competitive that people use. We're really at step 0, which is we need more people experimenting with the existing libraries. Glpyh recently just had a contest sponsored by the PSF, got a bunch of really good entries, new people experimenting with the library. I think Glpyh is our only real option right now. It would be great if we had more competition in this space, but the ask is go actually try to build something for a mobile device or a touch-based device in Python and report the bugs that you find. We're at level 0. Really a similar answer for the browser question, but if you want to weigh in on that specifically.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say one of the premise of that question is what I wanted to take issue with, is that it's totally possible today to run Python in the browser. I have written small internal applications with it. There are like 4 or 5 different options. The ones that I can think of off the top of my head are PyJS, Sculpt, S-K-U-L-P-T.
No, I just want to, Coursera teaches all of its intro to Python classes, intro to programming classes in Python. Like hundreds of thousands of people around the world are learning to program in Python because Coursera made this choice. They are all learning how to program in Python in the browser using Sculpt. Like Python being a thing that you do in the browser is possibly the future of Python anyway. So
yeah, so you should, and there's the PyPy.js and Python. Yeah. So given all of those options, one of the really interesting things about those is if you are curious, you're like, wow, I'd really like to just show all those Node folks what for, and go write an app that's same code on the client and the server and Python and not JavaScript. You can do that today. If you try, it will probably break. There's a lot of functionality that's not available. However, most of the bugs that are in those toolkits, like most of the bugs that are in Python, Sculpt, and PyJS and so forth, are bugs in just random standard library modules that aren't ported to use their special in-browser APIs. And they're not, there are language level issues, but if you want to get involved with those projects, fixing their bugs is not all that hard. So just
open source on GitHub, and 300,000 students are currently using it. That'd be an amazing place to have impact.
Yeah, we live in a world where anything which is written in C can, in theory, run in your browser. Weirdly enough. So, yeah, I think that's an optimistic place for us, even if the infrastructure isn't completely solid yet.
Just one quick comment, going back to the previous question about concurrency. I think, did we mention concurrency.futures?
I was going to, but
Oh, okay. So that was originally put in only in 3.2, but magically you can go download a 2.7 port of it too. It was also written by a coworker. I just had a weird thought while we were going through this whole conversation. I was thinking about something completely different, but somehow related, which is why Microsoft is having an issue with people still using XP, right? A lot of people found that they didn't really need to move to 7, 8, or Vista, or just 7 or 8, or whatever, right? So there's a ton of people using XP, right? And they're end of lifing it. What's going to happen there too? And then I had I must be on something, because then I started thinking about how can we solve these problems with Python 4. Is that going to be a better place for us so that we don't have this kind of disagreements or tension? I remember when we went from 1.x to 2.x, and that was like a piece of cake, right? There was no backwards incompatibility back then, and in fact, 1.6 was released on the same day as 2.0 alpha, so it was one of those things. But there was another reason why we had to move, and that's for another story for another time. But I think that the big kicker is the backwards incompat stuff, and that's kind of like what's stalling everybody, right? But yeah, there's more and more tools that are available now. I know that there's an issue with back-end concurrency stuff. Most companies that have basically been successful startups that actually built their entire business on Python probably didn't run Python on the back end, or they did something completely radical, to it. Like YouTube, when YouTube was acquired in 2005 or 6, it was 99% Python, but it certainly wasn't the Python you go and download now, right? It's just not possible to have it happen. And truth be told, that they're also Go fans now, right? So I can sense that a little bit of back end tension there. But it's you know, what can I say, right? The world is the way it is, and you know, I think it requires, you know, there's many ships in the sea, and we all kind of need to steer in one direction, whichever direction that is. But you know, you gotta start, you know, rowing the boat, putting in a motor, or doing something, right? You gotta, you know, I think it's really up to the entire community to sort of decide what the future is, and the efforts that are put in. I'm actually glad we're having this conversation tonight. I think this conversation needs to be had. You know, I'm still thinking I'm not going to panic for another 4 years, but you know, I'm going to be really nervous if we're going to have another meeting like this in 4 years from now.
Maybe Python versions are like the Linux kernel. You only want to use the even numbers.
Okay, so kind of 3 minutes here, so I think we wrap up, and the second to last question here, maybe. Three, four made, I mean, my life easier. I can write one code base, 2.7 and 3.4, and it seemed to make the porting story a lot easier. But is Python as a language done helping me move from 2 to 3? I mean, we got PEP 404. Is there anything else core dev can do to make my life easier moving from 2 to 3?
Yes.
And what is it?
Yeah. I think that's a difficult situation right now, and part of the reason is that the 2.7 cannot really be modified in giant ways, and there's the I'm so glad we didn't talk about 2.8 in this panel. It's really amazing.
What's that?
No idea. It doesn't exist.
I won't mention the Windows thing that's going on.
Oh my goodness. So yeah, it turns out if you like try to use the same Windows compiler for 5 years, it starts to really hurt. But
there might be into it.
Yeah, so we can continue to make improvements in Python 3, and a lot of these things have to do with things which Twisted is running into, especially with bytes. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't think that having bytes indexing return integers is a good idea, but unfortunately, we're past the point of no return on that. But we can definitely do things like adding % formatting to bytes. There's a proposal for that, which I hope will be in 2.5 or 3.5.
And if I could just add a little bit onto that, at the Python Language Summit this year, the core developers were actively soliciting feedback from folks who had issues porting and wanted to know what they could do. And I recently I represented that group. I guess because I was a little less angry than the guy who was handing out the Python 2.8 t-shirts. But in that capacity, I sent an email which outlined a list of steps, so you can go look on Python Dev and see what those steps were. That was certainly a partial list. If you can think of other things, there is kind of a limited amount of wiggle room and flexibility. And given that you brought it up, I'd like the Windows compiler toolchain thing to not just be an in-joke that us like chummy folks in the Python core community kind of know about. There is a problem with long-term support of things like Visual Studio 2008, which is the version that you have to build Python extensions with CPython 2.7 on Windows. And there are efforts in progress to make this whole process easier by modernizing the toolchain and doing a Python 2.7 release that is built against a modern compiler, among other things. And there are going to be some additions, some pretty significant additions to 2.7, like, I don't know if this has been decided or not yet, but certainly, so one thing that hasn't been decided is security backports. Lots of security fixes and features are going to be moving into the branch, which, by the way, Kenneth has done an amazing job making requests secure, even on the incredibly bad Python 2.7 SSL module.
Thank you.
And it's going to get even better because there are going to be some of the features in 3.x that are coming back, which will make it easier to upgrade.
More deprecation stuff in 2.7?
There's also some discussion of more deprecations. There's work underway right now to make 3.x emit some deprecations if you have print statements, so that you actually get a warning that tells you that you're using like 2.x code on 3. So there are things being added to both branches. Ensure pip is also under discussion for inclusion in Python 2.7, so that Windows users will have an easier time bootstrapping into the packaging ecosystem. So these things are all kind of ongoing, and especially Python core was very, very reluctant to do anything with 2.7 for a long time, and it really seems like now there's still reluctance to change the core interpreter very much, but to add packages to the standard library, to add packages to the downloadable distributions, to add warnings, to add backporting helpers, to add possibly even to add 6 to the standard library, which I think is a great idea.
Wait, someone proposed that?
I propose that kind of thing. I think, and there is resistance to it, right? This is still all under discussion. This is not something that is set in stone, but and there are valid reasons not to do it, but nevertheless, it is being worked through. So.
And if you want to join in the discussion, anybody can join. I mean, you have to have a high tolerance in your inbox, but anybody can join the Python development mailing list. This is open to everybody. You can weigh in too. I mean, please do.
Yeah, please do. And really, the only caveat is there's a separate mailing list for crazy ideas. If you have crazy idea, like you want Python to actually be a Lisp, right? Which I love that, but don't discuss that in Python dev. So please only raise somewhat realistic things there.
But I think what's so important about this is that, like, you know, before there was a complete unwillingness to come together. Now it's obvious that there is a willingness to come together on both sides. So we have to, like, have experiences and share them so that we can, like, actually know what we want, because we don't know what we want right now. So.
And in support of your thesis in the talk, one of the key motivators for that, I think, was that I've been yelling and screaming forever.
Yeah.
Nobody cares what I think. But the fact that the broader community was starting to chime in really helped. And I think that if you have something to say about something that's great about Python 3 or something that was terrible about your porting experience, say it on your blog. And that collective impression of what people are saying really does percolate into the core developers. And given that it's so hard to collect metrics, like, you know, Kenneth only has those numbers that he put on that slide with data because he's like friends with the guy who he found that data from. It's very hard to get data. It's very hard to collect data. So building that subjective impression, getting that communication out there is very important.
So I'm not going to cut any of the panelists off. I'm not going to take any more questions, and we're trying to wrap up, but I don't want to cut you off. So if you got a last thing.
Yeah, I do.
So just kind of as a closing thought, I wanted to bring to, so beyond the technical merits of whatever we're going to do here, like I said, I'm really interested in migrating towards Python 3, like a lot of us are. Some of us are more ambivalent about it. But one thing that motivates me beyond the technical reasons is really just gratitude and appreciation. Raise your hand here if you actually like programming in Python. Python has really significantly enhanced the quality of my life. If Python as a language did not exist, I'd be writing software in some other language, but Python is my favorite language. It really is, you know? And so I think one thing that motivates me a little bit is that I think Guido would be happy if the bulk of us moved more towards Python 3 a little faster. I think the people I think the people who, what's that?
No, you don't say.
Yeah, I know, it's very counterintuitive. But there's a lot of people who, remember everybody, all the work that's gone into Python, it's basically a volunteer effort. None of us have paid, for the most part, have paid to have this happen. We just had this wonderful language and language ecosystem handed to us. So part of my motivation really is just to give back, to help move this forward and do what I can to do that.
Okay, so yeah, final call to action. Right. So I mean, more people are learning Python than ever before. I think the future of the language is strong. I think we should focus on the big picture. I invite you all to go to python.org, become a member of the Python Software Foundation if you haven't. Join these mailing lists, join in these discussions. You can make a difference. Apply for a grant. We will help fund your ideas, fund your community outreach, fund your porting projects. So, please get involved. Pick one thing that you want to do this quarter. Come join the PSF and help us make it happen. We are the Python community. We are the Python developers. So. with that agency, go do something great.
Final call to action is final.
Yes.
All right.
I get the final.
Okay. Stop taking yourself so seriously and go have fun. This is why we all started writing code, and that is why I think we're all like resistant to all of this. This is supposed to be amazing. This is like really inspirational stuff. So just go and like experiment and have a great time.
All right.
Final.
So, besides building something, you guys ever like sweat over building something? It took a long time to do. You ran into a lot of issues, and then somehow you miraculously worked through it, and you came out with it, and it just felt so good. Well, you too can experience that by porting that to Python 3 and documenting your experience. I mean, literally, I'm throwing mine straight into the book. All right, you guys can do the same thing, post it on your blog, so that this stuff needs to come out of the woodwork, and we just need more people to do it. I had some conversations with some friends who are Perl 5 people and some friends who are Perl 6 people, and they don't even talk to each other. All right, I mean, we're having a conversation here, they're not. All right, so, I'm not going to say any more than that. Yeah, exactly. All right, I think that's it. No, one more. Final.
So as my final call to action, do the thing that Jessica said. It's easier than you think. A lot of these projects that seem like magic infrastructure that are super hard to work on are actually not. I would personally encourage you all to work on Twisted, but work on PyJS, work on Python, work on multiprocessing, work on any one of these things. There are so many small tasks that the super brain core developers cannot possibly focus on because they're too busy working on some 50,000 line patch. So if you want to fix the typos on the website, that is so valuable. You really cannot imagine. So.
And even if you don't know how to get started, just email me and I'll route you. Like honestly, there's zero barrier to entry here. I'm happy to field everybody's questions in this room. Just come find me on the internet.
So can we just get a big hand of applause for our panelists?